The seventh month of 2025 saw two death row inmates meet their fate in Florida's execution chamber, a significant drop from the 6 individuals executed just 1 month prior in June. Both cases culminated years of complex legal battles, countless appeals, and ultimately the final administration of justice. In today's deep dive, we'll dissect these two compelling cases, uncovering the devastating crimes that sealed these men's fates, examining their last spoken words, revealing their chosen final meals, and taking you inside those tense final moments before the lethal injection was administered. I'd love to connect with you before we dive in. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from today. Does your state still enforce capital punishment? How do you feel about the death penalty debate? I'm genuinely interested in hearing your thoughtful perspectives on this complex issue. Let's jump into our opening case, a shocking spree of violence that claimed the lives of 5 victims across multiple incidents. Michael Bernard Bell.
State of Florida execute Duval County inmate Michael Bernard Bell. Bell was sentenced to death for shooting and killing 2 people outside of a Moncrief bar. Prosecutors called it a revenge killing.
We shall explore all about Michael Bernard Bell's journey to the execution chamber, which began with a single act of self-defense in 1993 that claimed 2 innocent lives. This is the tale of how his obsession with vengeance destroyed multiple families, and why 2025 has become the year America embraced execution like never before. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. A hot summer day in Jacksonville, when a single gunshot set in motion a chain of events that ended with Bell strapped to a gurney 32 years later. June 1993. Jacksonville, Florida. The summer heat was oppressive, but nothing compared to the anger that consumed Michael Bernard Bell's soul. Theodore Wright never intended to become a killer that day. When Bell's brother confronted him, Wright was simply defending himself. The confrontation was brief, violent, and decisive. Bell's brother lay dead, and Wright walked away legally justified in his actions. The courts would later confirm what everyone already knew: this was textbook self-defense. But Michael Bell saw something entirely different. Where the law saw justified homicide, Bell saw murder. Where society saw closure, Bell saw the beginning of his mission. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Friends and family watched as grief twisted into something far more dangerous. Bell didn't mourn his brother's death. He weaponized it. "Wright belongs in the morgue," Bell declared, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a man who had already made his decision. These weren't the desperate words of a grieving brother spoken in a moment of pain. They were a promise, repeated daily like a mantra of death. What followed wasn't healing, it was preparation for war. Most people process grief in stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Michael Bell got stuck on anger and turned it into an art form. From June through December 1993, Bell's life became consumed by a single purpose: the systematic planning of Theodore Wright's murder. Bell studied Wright like a predator stalking prey. He learned Wright's routines, his hangouts, his habits. He mapped out potential locations for the kill. He considered weapons, timing, escape routes. Every conversation Bell had seemed to circle back to his plans for Wright. Friends became unwilling accomplices to his obsession. Family members grew tired of his constant threats. But Bell didn't care about their discomfort. He cared about perfecting his plan. The most chilling aspect wasn't Bell's determination to kill Wright. It was his complete lack of concern for collateral damage. Bell made it clear that anyone who got in his way would become a casualty of his war against Wright. December 9, 1993. The temperature had dropped, but Bell's blood ran hot with anticipation. After 6 months of planning, he finally spotted his target. There it was. Theodore Wright's distinctive yellow Plymouth Fury, parked outside a Jacksonville bar like a gift from the gods of vengeance. Bell's heart must have raced as he realized his moment had finally arrived. But fate had already played its cruelest trick. Wright had sold the car weeks earlier to his half-brother Jimmy West. The 23-year-old had no connection to Bell's brother's death, no knowledge of the vendetta brewing in Bell's mind, no idea he was about to become the victim of a case of mistaken identity that would cost him everything. Inside the bar, West was enjoying what should have been an ordinary night out. Beside him sat 18-year-old Tameka Smith, a teenager whose biggest worry should have been her next exam or weekend plans. They laughed, talked, and lived in the blissful ignorance of people who had no enemies and no reason to fear the darkness outside. Bell watched from the shadows, his AK-47 assault rifle ready for war. When he saw the group approaching the yellow Plymouth, he knew his time had come. The ski mask went on, the safety came off, and Michael Bell prepared to become a mass murderer. As Jimmy West, Tameka Smith, and their friend approached the car, Bell emerged from his hiding spot like death incarnate. The AK-47 in his hands wasn't chosen randomly. It was a weapon designed for maximum carnage, capable of firing dozens of rounds in seconds. Bell opened fire without warning, without mercy, without hesitation. The assault rifle's distinctive sound shattered the night as bullets tore through flesh and metal alike. West and Smith never had a chance to run, to hide, to even understand what was happening to them. But Bell's bloodlust didn't end with his primary targets. He continued firing at anyone within range, turning the parking lot into a war zone. Bullets riddled the front of the bar, shattering windows and sending terrified patrons diving for cover. Other innocent bystanders became targets in Bell's indiscriminate spray of death. Here's what makes this crime even more horrifying. Bell knew exactly who he was killing. Court records reveal that Bell recognized Jimmy West as Theodore Wright's brother before he pulled the trigger. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. It was a deliberate decision to murder an innocent man because of his family connection to Bell's real target. In Bell's twisted logic, killing Wright's brother was just as satisfying as killing Wright himself. Maybe even better, because it would cause Wright the same pain Bell had experienced when his own brother died. When the shooting stopped, two young people lay dead in pools of blood. Jimmy West, 23 years old, died at the scene. Tameka Smith, just 18, died on the way to the hospital. Their friend survived only because she had the presence of mind to duck when the shooting started. Bell calmly walked away from the carnage, drove to his aunt's house, and delivered the line that would seal his fate. Theodore got my brother, and now I got his brother. Mission accomplished. Revenge served. Two innocent lives destroyed. Some murder cases take years to solve. Others crack within hours because the killer can't keep his mouth shut. Michael Bell's case fell into the second category. Bell's 6-month campaign of threats against Theodore Wright had created a trail of witnesses that led directly to his door. When police began investigating the bar shooting, they didn't need to look far for suspects. Bell had essentially advertised his intentions to anyone who would listen. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Bell's own family. His aunt, horrified by his confession about killing Wright's brother, contacted authorities and repeated Bell's exact words. In trying to share his triumph, Bell had handed prosecutors their smoking gun. But the evidence went far beyond his confession. Forensic investigators recovered the AK-47 and traced it directly to Bell. Ballistics tests confirmed it was the murder weapon. Multiple witnesses identified Bell from photo lineups. His fingerprints were found at the crime scene. Perhaps most damning was Bell's complete lack of remorse. He made no attempt to hide his involvement, showed no regret for killing two innocent people, and seemed genuinely proud of what he had accomplished. Within days, police had built an airtight case against Michael Bell. His months of planning had been undone by his own arrogance and need to brag about his crimes. The most tragic aspect of the Jimmy West and Tameka Smith murders isn't just that they happened, it's that they were completely preventable. Michael Bell wasn't some unknown quantity who suddenly snapped. He was a career criminal with an extensive history of violence who should have been locked away from society permanently. His rap sheet read like a catalog of escalating brutality, armed robbery, assault, weapons charges, and other serious felonies that painted a clear picture of a man who couldn't be reformed. The system had multiple opportunities to protect the public from Bell, and it failed every single time. Most shocking was the timing of his release from prison just 7 months before the double murder. If Bell had served his full sentence for armed robbery, West and Smith would still be alive today. This wasn't an oversight or bureaucratic error. This was a systematic failure of the parole system that prioritized Bell's freedom over public safety. The Florida Parole Commission had released a violent habitual offender early, despite clear evidence that he posed a continuing threat to society. Judge R. Hudson Olive was furious about this failure during Bell's sentencing hearing. He didn't mince words about who was responsible for the deaths of 2 innocent people. His 2 murders can be laid at the doorstep of the Florida Parole Commission for the irresponsible early prison release of this violent, habitual criminal who should have been in prison at the time the murders were committed, Judge Olive declared from the bench. The judge's anger was justified. Bell represented exactly the type of offender the prison system was designed to contain. A repeat, violent criminal who showed no capacity for rehabilitation. Yet the system had failed in its most basic function, keeping dangerous people away from potential victims. Michael Bell's trial was less about determining guilt than about deciding punishment. The evidence against him was so overwhelming that his defense team never seriously contested his involvement in the murders. Prosecutors methodically presented their case, witness testimony placing Bell at the scene, forensic evidence linking him to the weapon, his own confession to family members, and months of documented threats against Theodore Wright. Each piece of evidence reinforced the same conclusion. Bell had planned and executed a calculated double murder. The defense's only real strategy was to argue against the death penalty, but even that faced insurmountable obstacles. The evidence of premeditation was undeniable. Bell had spent 6 months planning his revenge, obtained an assault weapon specifically for the attack, and carried out a massacre that killed 2 innocent people and endangered countless others. Judge Olive's sentencing remarks captured the calculated nature of Bell's crimes. The jury deliberated and found Bell guilty of first-degree murder for both deaths and recommended the death penalty. Judge Olive accepted their recommendation and sentenced Bell to die for his crimes. But Bell's case revealed another problem with America's justice system: the decades-long delay between sentencing and execution. Bell was sentenced to death in 1995, but it would take 30 years for that sentence to be carried out. During those 3 decades, Bell continued to cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars while his victims' families waited for justice. Michael Bell's execution represents more than just the end of one man's life. It symbolizes America's dramatic shift toward capital punishment in 2025. This year has already seen 26 executions nationwide, surpassing all of 2024's total, with months still remaining. Florida alone has carried out 8 executions, matching the state record for a single year, and positioning Governor Ron DeSantis to potentially break that record before Bell's legal team made desperate last-minute attempts to save his life. They filed appeals claiming witness coercion, argued for recantation of testimony, and challenged the constitutionality of Florida's death penalty procedures. The Florida Supreme Court rejected these appeals, citing the overwhelming evidence against Bell. Religious leaders also tried to intervene. Tampa Pentecostal minister Demetrius Minor led a group of 100 Florida Christians in petitioning Governor DeSantis to halt the executions, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. DeSantis had already signed Bell's death warrant in June, setting July 15 as the execution date. As Bell's execution approached, the familiar rituals of death row played out one final time.
Michael Bell died Tuesday for the 1993 murder of two people outside the Moncrief Liquors and Lounge. Prosecutors said he used an AK-47 in the attack.
Gunmen fired round after round into this car where Tamika Smith was sitting with 23-year-old Jimmy West.
This is video from our News4Jax archives of that case.
Michael Bell's last day began at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday, July 15th. For his final meal, he chose simple comfort food: an omelet, bacon, home fries, and orange juice. A modest breakfast for a man facing eternity. As witnesses gathered at Florida State Prison, Bell was given his chance for final words. He said, "Thank you for not letting me spend the rest of my life in prison." No apology, no remorse, just gratitude for his own death. At 6:09 p.m., the curtain rose, revealing Bell strapped to a gurney. 22 witnesses watched as he repeatedly raised his head, looking directly at them through the window. He appeared to speak with corrections officials as the lethal injection began. By 6:12 p.m., Bell had lost consciousness. At 6:24 p.m., a medical worker entered to check for signs of life. Finding none, Michael Bernard Bell was pronounced dead at 6:25 p.m. The families of Jimmy West and Tamika Smith finally received the justice they had waited 30 years to see. Two young lives cut short by senseless violence were finally avenged, though no execution could ever truly balance the scales of their loss. Michael Bell's story serves as a stark reminder that some crimes are so heinous, so calculated, and so destructive that only the ultimate punishment can provide justice. His execution marks not just the end of his life, but the closing of a chapter that began with one man's inability to accept that sometimes violence is justified, and his determination to prove that sometimes it isn't. In the end, Bell got exactly what he had given to others: death without mercy, justice without compromise, in a final reckoning that was 32 years in the making. 6:00 p.m. on July 31st, 2025, Edward Zakeski drew his final breath behind the walls of Florida State Prison. He committed one of the Sunshine State's most horrifying family massacre cases, a nightmare that began over 3 decades ago when a decorated military man transformed into an unthinkable monster.
A new record for the state of Florida. Governor DeSantis has signed the 9th death warrant this year, the most for any governor since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. The latest execution set for former Eglin Air Force Base airman Edward Zakrzewski. He's convicted of killing his wife and 2 children. In 1996, Zakrzewski pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, receiving 3 death sentences.
Zakrzewski, a former U.S. Air Force technical sergeant, had systematically slaughtered his wife, Sylvia, and their innocent children, 7-year-old Edward III and 5-year-old Anna, within the supposed safety of their own home in 1994. But here's the chilling milestone we've just witnessed. Zakrzewski's death has officially rewritten Florida's execution history. He becomes the 9th individual executed in 2025. This man eliminated his entire family using a machete, crowbar, and rope. The carnage was so unspeakable that the presiding judge declared he couldn't fathom a more vicious or barbaric manner of death. Now, let's dive deep into that fateful night in 1994 and uncover how a respected Air Force veteran descended into becoming one of Florida's most despised family annihilators. But before we explore the disturbing details of Zakrzewski's unforgivable acts, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This story ventures into darkness you absolutely cannot miss. Born on January 31, 1965, in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Edward James Zakrzewski II had spent an astonishing 29 years awaiting his appointment with death, from his April 19, 1996 sentencing until that final moment. To put this in perspective, this man lingered on death row for nearly 3 decades. The lives he brutally extinguished belonged to his South Korean bride, Sylvia, and their precious children, 7-year-old Edward III, affectionately known as Kim, and 5-year-old Anna. The savage killings unfolded on June 9, 1994, transforming their Mary Esther, Florida home into a house of horrors. 3 first-degree murder convictions sealed his fate. Here's the staggering reality. Florida's death row currently warehouses 269 condemned souls, with over 100 languishing there for 3 decades or more. Zach Grzeski's execution followed a mere 16 days after Michael Bell met his end on July 15th, marking the second consecutive month in 2025 featuring dual executions. Governor Ron DeSantis has orchestrated an execution marathon this year, obliterating records that had stood untouched since the Reagan era. We're witnessing a lethal pace that defies modern precedent. To comprehend how we arrived at that blood-soaked evening, we must rewind to the beginning. And surprisingly, this tale initially unfolded as what appeared to be a classic military romance. In 1986, Technical Sergeant Edward Zakreski was deployed in Montana when destiny introduced him to Poon Eun, a South Korean woman whose life would become tragically intertwined with his. Following their courtship and her pregnancy, marriage seemed natural, prompting her transformation into Sylvia, an American identity crafted for military community acceptance. Their union produced 2 beautiful children, Kim and baby Anna. As Zach Grzeski advanced through Air Force ranks, their family endured the nomadic military lifestyle. A 3-year Korean assignment from 1989 to 1992 proved particularly challenging. Sylvia endured relentless discrimination for her interracial marriage and mixed heritage children. The emotional toll on this young mother and her innocent kids was undoubtedly devastating. The 1992 relocation to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida should have marked a fresh chapter for the family as they established roots in Mary Esther, Okaloosa County. Instead, Edward and Sylvia's marriage continued its downward spiral, with court records documenting escalating domestic turmoil. What makes this story truly spine-chilling is the testimony from neighbors who revealed Zakreski's previous death threats. On 2 separate occasions, he had coldly declared he would kill her and the children before he let that happen, his twisted response to any mention of divorce. Meanwhile, Sylvia had been secretly contemplating escape, dreaming of returning to South Korea with her precious children. The catalyst that ignited this family's destruction? A single devastating phone call on June 9, 1994. While Grzeski was stationed at work, his innocent 7-year-old son Kim dialed his father's number. In that fateful conversation, young Kim unknowingly signed his family's death warrant by revealing Mommy's plans to file for divorce and relocate to South Korea. For Grzeski, who had already twice vowed to commit familicide rather than face abandonment, this revelation triggered his darkest fears. Rather than exploding in anger, he shifted into calculated killer mode. During his lunch break, he purchased a machete from a local retailer. Returning home, he assembled his arsenal, adding a crowbar and rope to his deadly collection. With meticulous precision, he concealed these instruments of death in the bathroom, even taking time to hone the machete's blade. Then, displaying chilling composure, he returned to his duties and later attended an evening college class, maintaining his facade of normalcy. That night, as his unsuspecting family returned home, Zakreski orchestrated his horrific plan. After directing the children to their television programs, he launched his assault on Sylvia, bludgeoning her repeatedly with the crowbar before dragging her to the bedroom for continued brutalization. He then strangled her with rope, though medical examiner Dr. Edward Harvard's findings revealed the most disturbing detail. Sylvia remained conscious during the strangulation despite suffering a fractured skull and at least 8 machete lacerations across her back. Her torment concluded only after he dragged her corpse to the bathroom for final mutilation. The children's murders represent the absolute nadir of human depravity. Zakreski lured 7-year-old Kim to the bathroom under the innocent pretense of teeth brushing. Once inside, the boy's own father unleashed a machete frenzy, nearly severing Kim's head while inflicting fatal wounds to his head, neck, and spine. 5-year-old Anna faced the same deceptive summons for dental hygiene. The terror this innocent child experienced is unimaginable. She likely witnessed her brother's slaughter. Both children bore defensive wounds on their arms and hands, heartbreaking evidence of their desperate attempts to fend off their murderous father. The savagery was so incomprehensible that Judge Barron, while delivering Zakraszewski's sentence, declared it inconceivable to imagine a more heinous or atrocious way of dying. Following his barbaric acts, Zakraszewski didn't linger at the crime scene. He immediately fled to Orlando, boarding a Hawaii-bound flight where he orchestrated a complete identity transformation. Adopting the alias Michael Green, he ingeniously infiltrated a religious commune operated by a minister's family, securing shelter in a modest shack by offering his services as a maintenance worker. For an incredible 4-month period, this charade succeeded brilliantly. While Florida law enforcement launched an intensive investigation, Zakraszewski maintained his low-profile existence in paradise. Back in the Sunshine State, detectives had uncovered the massacre and swiftly identified Zakraszewski as their primary target. Authorities filed 3 murder charges against him in absentia, while the Air Force officially classified him as absent without leave. Despite a comprehensive nationwide dragnet, the killer had seemingly evaporated without a trace. Then fate intervened in the most unexpected way. 4 months post-murders, the case appeared on Unsolved Mysteries, the iconic television program renowned for cracking cold cases. The minister's family gathered around their television that evening and suddenly recognized their trusted handyman, Michael Green, as the fugitive killer displayed on their screen. The tension became palpable when the minister casually observed to Zakraszewski that the wanted man bore a striking resemblance to him. Picture that suffocating moment of recognition. The psychological pressure proved overwhelming. Merely 24 hours after the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast on October 15, 1994, Zakraszewski marched into a police station and surrendered. His October 25th extradition to Florida didn't end his criminal scheming. While detained at Okaloosa County Jail awaiting trial, Zakraszewski and a fellow inmate orchestrated an August 1995 jailbreak attempt. Their plan crumbled when guards caught them attempting to breach the prison perimeter, another spectacular failure. When trial proceedings commenced, Zakraszewski shocked everyone with an unexpected decision. On March 19, 1996, before jury selection could begin, he entered guilty pleas to all 3 first-degree murder charges. This strategic move bypassed the guilt phase entirely, leaving only the penalty determination, life imprisonment versus execution. Prosecutor Assistant State Attorney Bobby Elmore launched an aggressive death penalty campaign for all 3 victims. Elmore methodically demonstrated how these killings epitomized heinous, atrocious, and cruel criminality. He stressed the premeditated, calculated nature of the violence. This wasn't spontaneous rage, but orchestrated annihilation. Elmore particularly emphasized 5-year-old Anna's prolonged terror, being the final victim who likely witnessed her brother's brutal demise. Defense attorney Elton Killam pursued a dramatically different approach, advocating for life imprisonment through a controversial strategy. Killam portrayed Zakraszewski as suffering extreme emotional and psychological disturbance, claiming Sylvia had tormented him through alleged infidelity and gambling addiction. Most shockingly, the defense argued Zakraszewski acted from misguided mercy, believing his children would endure discrimination as half-breeds in Korea, and that he intended their deaths to be swift and painless. Despite calling the entire case bizarre, Killam still pleaded for life imprisonment. On March 31, 1996, the jury delivered their fateful recommendations. By narrow 7-5 margins, they endorsed death sentences for both Sylvia and Kim's murders. However, little Anna's case produced a deadlocked 6-6 split, which under Florida law automatically triggered a life imprisonment recommendation. Judge G. Robert Barron had different intentions entirely. On April 19, 1996, he exercised his judicial override authority, rejecting the jury's life sentence recommendation for Anna. and condemning Zakarzewski to death for all three killings. Barron's rationale centered on Anna's unimaginable terror, the psychological torment of witnessing her brother's slaughter while knowing her father intended to murder her next. Naturally, Zakarzewski launched an aggressive legal counteroffensive. What ensued was an epic, nearly three-decade marathon of appeals, exhaustive judicial challenges pursued through every conceivable avenue. The Florida Supreme Court affirmed all three death sentences on June 12, 1998. The U.S. Supreme Court subsequently rejected his petition on January 25, 1999. Undeterred, Zakarzewski's legal team persisted relentlessly. The Florida Supreme Court dismissed his post-conviction challenge in 2003. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his federal appeal in 2006, then denied a subsequent attempt in 2009. His attorneys glimpsed hope in 2017 when Florida modified its statutes requiring unanimous jury verdicts for capital punishment. They immediately filed for resentencing on May 25, 2017, but the Florida Supreme Court crushed those aspirations, ruling the legislative change wasn't retroactive since his sentences achieved finality in 1999. Another 2018 attempt met identical rejection. Even his final desperate appeal, filed merely 9 days before execution on July 22, 2025, was swiftly denied by the Florida Supreme Court. By 2016, marking Zakarzewski's 20th death row anniversary, he joined 141 Florida inmates who had essentially depleted their legal remedies. Ironically, Florida reversed course in 2023, abolishing the unanimity requirement and permitting death sentences with simple 8-4 jury majorities. After nearly 3 decades of courtroom warfare, appeals, and procedural delays, Zakarzewski had finally exhausted every legal lifeline and temporal reprieve. July 31, 2025. Zakarzewski woke up at 5:15 a.m., knowing he would never see another sunrise. For his last meal, he chose something basic: fried pork chops, root beer, and ice cream. Not fancy, but that's what he wanted. At 6:00 p.m. sharp, the death chamber curtain opened. There was Zakarzewski on the table, covered by a white sheet. After almost 30 years waiting to die, his time had come. The warden asked if he had any last words. What he said was strange. "I want to thank the good people of the Sunshine State for killing me in the most cold, calculated, clean, humane, efficient way possible. I have no complaint." The execution was fast and clean. The drugs started flowing, and Edward Zakarzewski was declared dead at 6:12 p.m., just 12 minutes from beginning to end. Zakarzewski's death made Florida break a record. 9 executions in 2025, more than any year in modern times, and there are still 5 months left. This case shows us that evil can hide behind normal-looking people, even those we should be able to trust. The month of July 2025 brought the execution of 2 condemned men in Florida, marking nearly 3 decades since their heinous crimes first shocked their communities. Michael Bernard Bell and Edward J. Zakarzewski II had each waited almost 30 years for their sentences to be carried out, a testament to the lengthy appeals process that defines America's death penalty system. I'm curious about your perspective on these developments. Do these executions represent justice fulfilled, or do they raise concerns about our criminal justice system? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on the latest developments in criminal justice and true crime stories.